Welcome to this week's Rob's Country. We're going to be looking at animal health, we're going to be looking at wool, we're also going to be catching up with nutrition as far as animals are concerned, and there's going to be some fabulous stuff you can use at a shelter or feed or whatever, but that's coming up. In the meantime, we're going to be looking at fattening weaner calves.
Yes, yeah, so obviously weaning time with your cattle at the moment, and a lot of people looking at getting some cattle on to fatten through going forwards. So looking at what we need to look at for selection when you go to sales and bring your cattle home.
Dead easy to get to a sale, but what are you looking for?
So you want to go in there looking for well-grown animals. You want to get a nice even line through. You're wanting to take animals that are similar ages and similar sizes as well home, and trying to source from the same group as well, rather than getting 2 or 3 here and 2 or 3 there and bring them home and mixing them.
There's a reason for that, because they get aggro or because you don't know the background?
You can cause a lot more stress in the groups as you're mixing them. You can also run the risk of introducing diseases that haven't previously been exposed to.
I'm just thinking about skinny little animals that are cheap.
Yeah, those ones that look like a bargain.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one. They're the ones that come home and cost you a lot of money. So I guess a lot of them, they've had a bad start to life for whatever reason. Sometimes they haven't got the colostrum that they needed. Their immune systems often aren't that strong and robust. So often it's those animals that actually don't cope well with the transport or the yarding through the sales, the extra stress on their bodies. They are quite prone to coming down with pneumonias or diarrheas soon after they arrive on the property.
Is there any sort of thing once they get to the property you should be doing, like isolating them in the yards, or just, I don't know, is there anything?
If you've got other stock on the property at the time, I'd certainly isolate these ones away from the rest of the stock for the first couple of weeks. Make sure they come home, they're going on to good feed and sheltered paddocks.
And what about animal health, the sort of the drenching or the zip-zap down the back?
Definitely. So bringing them all on, you certainly want to make sure that they're drenched when they come onto the property. That's a topic all in itself, obviously, once we start thinking about drench resistance and things, but you want to get a pour on onto them, make sure that they're not coming on wormy.
What sort of history are you able to glean from cattle in a yard?
Probably background history. It's hard to know exactly what has been done previously. The main thing would be looking for those well-grown, healthy-looking animals. They're the ones that are likely to have had the good animal health coming through as well.
And so basically, as far as the sort of things like internal parasites, have you just got to run with it?
Yeah, run with it, protect yourself through treatment when they arrive on the property, and then go from there.
Mixing breeds okay? It doesn't matter, doesn't they all
Yeah, it doesn't matter too much. Sometimes some breeds are more sort of aggro or aggressive than others. There are variations there, but again, it's the mixing from different sources. There will be some aggro initially, a lot of the time, and before they sort themselves out.
And I guess buy something with some similar topography or harder photography than yours.
Well, definitely. That can be a huge advantage. If you're buying cattle that have come off the hills, they're usually much fitter. They're a bit more robust often, and certainly if you're buying and you're on the hills and you're buying from the flat land, can take them a while to adjust.
They don't go the other way, do they?
You certainly hear those animals that walk to the top of the paddock and stay there for the next week because they don't know how to come back down.
That's scary.
Yeah,
it is.
Happens.
BVD.
So BVD, it's a viral disease and it affects reproduction a lot. That's probably where it has its major effects. But as someone fattening cattle, it's something to be aware of, and it ties back in with these small, skinny animals. At a certain stage of pregnancy, if the dam's infected with the BVD virus, the calf inside her can actually become infected and carry that virus through after birth. They're what we call persistently infected. So those animals usually have a poor immune system. They grow quite poorly, and so that they will sometimes be those smaller animals in the group. The problem with that is, in a certain number of these persistently infected animals, they then develop a secondary sort of flare-up of infection that we call mucosal disease. It's a really severe diarrhoea and wasting and fatal as well. So again, something to be aware of, something to get looked at if you've got these sickly looking animals in your mob. we can diagnose it with a simple blood test.
That's suggesting that you have bought some sickly looking animals.
It is. Yeah, generally, if you stick to the rules, you should be avoiding things. It's not always the case. Some of them will grow better than others, but
Yeah. Is there any test you can do for VD?
You can. So simple blood tests will diagnose the persistently infected animals.
Okay. You go into the sale yards, you bought some bargains or some really good looking animals. How can you tell whether they're going to be doing 15 laps of the paddock every day or if they're going to go out and graze?
Well, once you get them home, or
No, I was thinking while they're in the yard, in the sales yard, because I guess the ones that are looking over the top of the gate.
Exactly. So you want to be looking and taking into account temperament, and certainly if there are animals there as you're going past them and they're racing to the other side of the pen, like you said, they're steering out over the top of the yard fences as well, they are super flighty. They're going to take a lot longer to settle down. Generally, regardless of what you do buy in, once you've got them on the property, make a point of getting out there, walking through them every day. So just having your presence through them, it will start to quieten them down. Some will get very tame and very used to you being around too. It makes it much, much easier for handling down the track.
They don't know they're going to be prime and disappear again, do they?
Not at all.
Feeding.
So obviously we've got a lot of feed on the ground at the moment. It's a perfect time to be bringing in the animals, but we need to take into account we're going into a Canterbury winter. The feed growth is going to slow down, it's going to get cold, they're going to have high needs through the winter as well. So take into account sources of hay and baleage, so you've got supplementary feed on hand as well.
Yep. And handling?
So definitely if you're taking on cattle onto property, you need to have access to good yard facilities. Obviously to load and unload them, it's imperative, but also if you do have any animal health issues, for us to come out and help you, we need them in yards so we can examine them.
And I think the nice thing is that if you can actually get in amongst them and regularly, they're going to be quieter, so they have to put on more weight.
Mate, they'll be quieter, they'll grow better, makes handling through the yards much easier and much safer. And certainly if we have to come out and examine them or treat them, it makes our job a lot safer too.
And Rachel, when they get on the truck for their last journey, they're nice and quiet and relaxed and the pH levels are good.
And that meat's going to be fantastic.
It does too. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, we're going to be talking wool with John Dawson. Welcome back to Rob's Country. How's the wool season going?
Well, it's coming to an end, Rob. The season will officially end at the end of June, and the season's finishing on a strong note. I just had a quick look before I left the office, and prices would be 10% ahead of where they were this time at the end of the season. And if you go back to the end of April, they were actually $1 up on where they were over the average of last season. So, so the markets, and given where the currencies are and everything like that, it's holding up pretty well, really.
Good, and we're getting enough supply, because that's been one of the things.
Well, this is the issue at the moment, because we've had the weather doing what it's been doing, and there's been delays in shearing, and at the moment there's a bit of a squeeze on in a part of the season that's usually struggling for supply anyway, because we're near the end of the season. So that's one of the reasons why prices have moved up like they have, and that has been the trend probably for the last 2 months.
But with all due respect, the gap between seasons is about a month.
Yeah, but there's less wool at this time of year. Less wool comes on the market. So people, you're always selling wool, always trading wool, and there's a lot of, obviously, different types, if you know what I mean, and at times, especially when the Chinese come in the market, they can put a lot of pressure on certain types, and if there's a shortfall in supply of any one of those types, and it doesn't have to be a lot, you'll see a price impact. So I think you're seeing that today, where exporters have sold, there's less of certain types that they expected. Like, for example, an auction was cancelled on the 1st of May this year in the North Island because of lack of wool, and because they've had climate issues up there as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when things like that happen, they certainly can cause spikes in the market, and we've seen a few of those in the last few
I'm
months.
sort of getting a feeling, John, that wool is being treated no longer as a byproduct, and people are now starting to say, well, hey, listen, there's, I'm actually wanting to look after it.
Well, I think it pays to talk about what's happened. I think as far as the carpet end of the clip's concerned, in other words, the coarse end of the clip up to, say, around the 38, 39 micron area, which New Zealand has traditionally produced a lot of, i.e., I think the crossbred end would account for something like 60 to 70% of the whole clip. What's happened is, and I think it's been well documented, is that wool, the carpet end of the New Zealand clip has lost a lot of market share as far as going into carpets is concerned, especially in the Australasian area, and I would suggest in Europe as well. But what's actually taken up the slack there, a lot of that coarse end of the clip is now going into the Chinese top making area. In other words, it's a different end use. It's been blended with other fibres, natural fibres and man-made fibres, and it's going into upholstery yarns, knitting yarns, into a different completely market segment. And that has actually been very positive for New Zealand wool, because if we'd solely relied on the traditional carpet demand that we've seen for decades, if you like, I think the price level will be a lot different than it is today. So that has been a fundamental shift in the actual sort of area where New Zealand wool goes, and that has happened gradually over the last 5 years.
Why did it happen? I mean, it suddenly said, well, hey, listen, we can use it for other things, or did we market it?
I think it's been, as we know, the growth of the Chinese economy, etc., a lot of that product staying within China, and I think really, at the end of the day, it comes back to their demand for wool, a natural fibre.
Yep.
So they've changed their thinking as far as product lines concerned. They've managed to change what they can do, if you like, and they've actually made new products. So they've, you only have to go back 10 years, I think they've come out 2 or 3 microns in the type of wool that they can put into these different areas that I just talked about. It's been a gradual thing, but I think it's just their demand for wool. They want wool, so to get the actual quantities that they actually need, they've had to change what they're actually buying, if you like, and that's been the main reason for it.
As a market, China seems to be very into natural things. Like, I mean, they love how
they've got an affinity for wool. They always have had, and I think it goes back to the climate. Their climate, they have extremes of climate in China. They value the attributes of wool. They always have. It's a very traditional thing, and they'd be the biggest single user of wool now out of New Zealand. I think China accounts for something like 51-52% of our whole clip goes to China. It's actually come back a bit to that. So they're very significant, and I think as far as a wool exporter process is concerned, they've been very good as far as they're keeping the price level where it is today. Okay, we accept it should be a lot higher than where it is. We've talked about all that, but at least it's sent a bet. It's put a foundation into the market. As I said, those coarser microns would have struggled without them.
I've heard reports from people who have been over there, and the size of the mills is mind-blowing.
It is, and I think you had a perception of China being way behind the times as far as equipment, technology, etc., etc. Not anymore. I mean, some of these mills you'd see they're as good as anywhere in the rest of the world, and I would say that as we go on to the future, they're coming under a lot more pressures for. You'll see their environment concerns, etc., etc. So for them to actually compete and stay in business and export the volumes that they have been doing, they will have to increase their efficiencies, technology, etc., etc.
Well, I mean, people have said they've been to a wool mill, and there's 3,000 people on the payroll.
Well, I've been to some like that, but of course you never see them because they're so big. You never, unless you had a car.
Exactly.
You'd never get
I mean,
around
these things are really huge.
Oh, some of them are huge. Not all like that, but there's some very, very large mills, no question. Yeah.
So if the Romney type wools, the strong wools, are going into those sorts of markets, is mid-micron still strong? Because
the whole market's been quite positive, actually. And a lot of it, dare I say it, is you're talking about the Chinese market again. The problem you have there is wool still suffers from volatility in price because the Chinese tend to be, when they buy very large volumes, and of course when they stop, they stop.
Yeah, they do.
Right.
It's a huge tap.
So you have to handle that, if you like, and sometimes it causes price distortions and the wrong price signals that come out of producer countries, if you like, but that's the way they are, and so you learn to sort of cope with that over the years, but they're a very big force and positive for the New Zealand wool market.
Who's buying the other 48%?
A lot of it still goes in traditional markets like India, where they make the hand-tufted rugs, you know, the beautiful hand-tufted rugs that people put on the parquet floors, etc. And a lot of that product ends up in countries like the United States, certain European countries. So India, a lot still goes to Italy, UK. UK is a traditional carpet wool user. They like their carpets, they like their floor-to-floor tufted carpet, and that continues. So a lot of New Zealand wool goes in there still, but on a percentage basis, it's certainly decreased over the last decade and a half.
We'll just hang in there with China.
Yeah.
China.
Well, not only China, but I'm just saying New Zealand wool still goes to a lot of countries in the world, but you have to have that foundation, and China's the foundation.
So you got the cake and then you got the cream.
Correct, yeah.
John, thank you very much indeed. Speaking of different things, there's a new grass that suddenly hit, and there's a PhD student from Lincoln University who's been doing a lot of research on it.
Miscanthus is a Japanese hybrid, and it's a perennial grass, so it grows from a rhizome, and it is a harvestable grass as well, because you can harvest the crop yearly, and the following spring it will regrow to the height that its expected height, which is about 4 metres high once it's established. The reason why we're looking at shelter belts on dairy farms is because with the introduction of the centre pivots, the previous Pinus shelter belts and Macrocarpa and Eucalyptus shelter belts were not allowing the centre pivot to travel through the farm, so they were all removed, and now you end up with dairy farms with no shelter at all, either for the cattle or the pasture, or and any shelter benefits that come from having that on the farm. So the reason we looked at Miscanthus was because you can get 4 metre high growth off the plant, and it allows the centre pivot to pass through it because it's got flexible nature. The reason why height is important is because shelter effect is related to height of the shelter. So shelter effect, which is the area, the length where the shelter effect extends into the paddock, is about 10 to 12 times shelter height. So you'll get 60, 70 metres into the paddock of shelter benefit from your 4 metre high shelter belts.
And it's quite a flexible plant, just bends over and goes straight back up again?
Yeah, if you look at it when we've got a gale blowing, that's the nature of it. It bends quite happily in the wind and then springs back up to the way it should be once the gales are finished.
I mean, obviously for cattle they need protection from wind in terms of welfare and that sort of stuff. Do you just want to explain to people why pasture, just grass actually needs shelter?
Yeah, I mean, people quite understand why cattle need shelter from the weather, but the pasture itself also, when you look at growth of the pasture in shelter compared to unsheltered areas of the paddock, you'll find the stomata stay open longer, which is the parts of the leaves that allow the gas exchange in the leaf, which is with the stomata open you get photosynthesis for longer periods, and then you'll get more growth from your grass. So we've looked at grass growth in the sheltered area of the paddock compared to a control area of equivalent size in the unsheltered part of the paddock. We've recorded 10 to 15% more pasture growth where we've had shelter effect. Yeah, one of the advantages of using Miscanthus is it has an end use for the farmer itself, so it can be used when it's harvested either as straw for bedding or for feeding the cattle, or as a biomass for bioenergy production. And one of the key areas that we're looking at is trying to introduce a plant that's being developed in America over into New Zealand, where you put biomass in one end and produce diesel at the other end that is usable and can be put straight into the tractor or the trucks and used straight away.
And is that expensive or complicated technology?
The technology's been developed. The initial machinery has a large capital cost, and what we're also looking at is trying to develop a more portable version that can be taken around to farms, and then farmers can use it to generate their own diesel.
And of course that would be good for the factories, I suppose, in terms of having milk tankers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Western Milk, who sponsor the research that we're doing, one of the key things that they could be looking at was producing diesel and then using that to fuel their trucks as they collect milk on their rounds.
Obviously they need a larger number of farmers to be using this stuff to have the scale to actually try and get that going.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing. We haven't found any real disadvantages with planting miscanthus, and it seemed to meet all the attributes that we've been looking for. So the idea at the moment, we've just got small trial plots on the northern corners of the paddocks, because we're mainly looking at protection from the northerly winds. But if you could, the idea is to have it planted around each paddock, and then that will afford shelter into the paddock and also give you more biomass production, because the yield of miscanthus, especially under irrigation, can be in excess of 30 tonnes dry matter a hectare.
And how much do you need to create a, I don't know, let's say 10 or 50 litre, however many litres of biodiesel?
From a 30 tonnes of miscanthus produced per hectare, you should be able to produce 9,000 litres of diesel.
Do you need special engines to use that diesel, or could you get your old Hilux out and chuck a bit of diesel into that?
Yeah, the diesel that you produce can go straight into any vehicle without any further alteration to the mixture. Yeah. One of the things we're aware of is we're introducing a non-native onto dairy farms, and we also conscious of the fact that we want to improve biodiversity on the dairy farms, but by planting the shelter belts you're actually creating new habitat, and miscanthus has a growth nature where you have quite a gappy understory which allows other plants to grow between the miscanthus plants. So we're looking at planting New Zealand native bedding plants, which and also allowing the natural weed cover to build up, which produces an environment which encourages insects, and some of these will be predatory insects on agricultural pests.
Grass grub and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the recent findings of a particular insect, fly larvae, that feeds on grass grub, if it could be proved that miscanthus provides habitat that encourages that to increase its levels of population on dairy farms, then that's the sort of things that you look at when you're looking at introducing a new product or a new plant onto the dairy farm. Miscanthus has been introduced into New Zealand about 3 or 4 years ago, and it wouldn't have been introduced if it hadn't met all the stringent tests for proving it's non-invasive. It's a hybrid plant, so it flowers but it doesn't set seed, so there's no risk of seed dispersal, and the rhizome spreads very slowly, and also if you want to actually remove the plant, it's susceptible to glyphosate, so you just spray it with glyphosate, or just let your cows in to graze it, because cows actually do graze it within the paddock. Because you're providing the environment where bumblebees like to forage in the long grass to try and find their nesting habitats, so we've put bumblebee motels in the shelter areas to see whether we get more occupancy compared to the open paddock. And all the motels that any motels that have been occupied by bumblebees have been in the miscanthus. So if you've got bumblebees on the farm, then they're one of the most important insects for pollinating clover. In fact, red clover can only be pollinated by bumblebees, whereas white clover, you've got more, can be pollinated by honeybees and bumblebees, but bumblebees are the main important pollinator of those types of plants. The thing with miscanthus and exotic species is when you actually prepare the ground for planting the crop, if you want to, you make a sterile seedbed like you would with any other crop. You then let the crop grow. The crop is very vigorous, so it will outcompete exotic species. But then, because you harvest it as well, the action of harvesting it for most other species won't tolerate harvesting on a yearly basis. So miscanthus, because of its nature and its growth nature, and the fact that you can harvest it, and that aspect means it will not encourage any other exotics to grow within it.
Pretty amazing stuff, sort of, yeah. Anything you want to do with it, it'll do it. After the break, we're going to be talking horticulture with Jim. Jim, pretty wet out there. Have people still got stuff to harvest?
Yeah, there is. I mean, the grapes are now, we'd just about say they're finished. And the last probably week or two was a bit heartbreaking. A number of the fruit was put on the ground rather than put into the vats, simply because you want to still get it removed from the bushes, or the vines, sorry. And so that was a bit disappointing for some of those guys. Not a huge amount. The winemakers will have an interesting winter, going through and manipulating and producing some good wines. There'll be some good wines come out of 2014, there's no doubt about it, but we didn't need what we had. But of course, full swing now is one of the next major horticultural crop for New Zealand is the kiwi fruit, and it's going very well. The quality is good, hasn't been affected by the rain so much. You can get what they call skin staining on a kiwi fruit, where the water comes around the side of the fruit and it slowly dries on the fruit and makes a mark on it. Fortunately, that hasn't been the case in this season, so it's going pretty well according to the guys up north.
Why don't you take the? Why don't you leave the grapes on the vine?
Well, the reason why you don't leave the grapes on the vine, it inhibits the latent botrytis, as we call it, and other diseases. So if you remove them from the vine and put them onto the ground, you can then treat them a lot easier and a lot better there than having them up into the vine canopy. Although the leaves come off and the bunches will eventually either be eaten off by birds or fall off anyway, it multiplies the problem of having latent diseases about. So it's a hygiene process, really.
Okay, then you can mulch it all up anyway.
Yes,
so.
yeah, and we'll spray it properly there, and gets away from the pruning.
You talked about kiwi fruit. You didn't say PSA.
No, I didn't say PSA, but yeah, PSA is still causing the industry some concern. There's no doubt about that, and also the gold and the different coloured fruit that's coming through now. There are some resistant varieties coming through. It's a long process, and it's really affected that side of our industry quite dramatically. And as I said last time, Rob, it's affected other areas of horticulture simply because of importation of plant material to try and continue on with our breeding programs. So there's several areas of negativity coming out of PSA, but you really got to think about the poor growers and the exporters who have built markets, and the growers have had to take their vines out. That's pretty soul destroying.
How's the apple industry?
It's actually sweet, if I may use the pun.
You can use the pun, Jim.
It is very good. It's going well. They're underway now. They've got good colour, good size. The markets are strong. And if our dollar wasn't as strong as it is, their returns would even be better. But look, despite the high dollar, they're still getting some good returns and getting them into some markets. So I think what we've got over the last probably 5 years, a really good balance between what we produce, what we've got out there we can market to. There's not the cracks that we've had to force our way into in the markets. They're more open for us, and they're willing to take the different size fruit that we now produce, which is really good. So it's a pretty balanced situation, and everybody's starting to make some money again, and a bit of a smile, irrespective of the weather.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I keep thinking about Australia saying, yeah, you can sell your apples into our markets, but we're just not going to buy them.
Yeah.
And what's happening there?
Yeah, look, there's a bit of fruit going in there. It's peanuts. The politicians feel better about it. The growers aren't making a whole lot more money because of it, because the volumes aren't great. However, time will tell. Consumers do like to get taste, and we give the taste in some of the varieties they're specifically sending to Australia, and I'm hopefully that'll pull through. But they've got a very strong industry over in Australia, and it looks after itself very well. We haven't seen apples being tipped into the sea at the wharf or anything like that. I mean, potentially that could have happened. It hasn't happened. But as I say, the numbers aren't big really, Rob.
So there's no sort of Sydney apple party or...
No, not really, no.
Very wet and muddy. What's that going to do for the coming season?
Yeah, well, right at the moment, it's been quite beneficial for a number of the horticultural crops, and it's been quite detrimental to a number of the horticultural crops. May I start with the ones that have benefited? There's been a lot of fertilisers that have been sitting around in soil profiles for quite a number of years that doesn't get finished and used in the autumn period. That has really been, I would suggest, sucked up quite a bit by the plants. It hasn't gone through to the profile and gone out to the water and caused a whole lot more nitrate problems or anything like that. Not at all. It's actually being utilised, and we're finding that in the different crops because there's growth extension that's still carrying on. So we've still got good growth extension on, and the conditions are being warm. So actually the plant is continuing on. Now that tells me that it's doing two things. If it's growing shoot at the top of a plant, it's also growing roots and root hairs at the bottom under the ground that we can't see. So that's a positive side. The negative side of it is we've got carrot growers and vegetable growers that are up to their blooming knees in mud and want to get those crops out of the ground in good quality. That's a real struggle for them, wanting to get resowing for the winter crops and now early spring crops in terms of vegetable farmers, and they can't get on that land to get that back into production. So that's rather annoying. And then there's the grape growers and the blackcurrant growers and those sort of guys, strawberry growers who start to plant in about a month's time. They're new plantings. The ground conditions aren't that particularly conducive to working at the moment. If you start working ground too early, you actually muck it up. So it's a matter of being patient. And as I've said to a number of growers over the last sort of fortnight or so, time to go on holiday, guys, and then come back and do the work. It's still very important that we do get such strawberries, bush fruit in the ground, apples even in the ground, June, July, June preferably. It gives some time for the plant to settle into the winter, and it does start to shoot out little wee root hairs that start to establish the actual crop itself. And that's important to get that period, give that plant time to do that under the ground. Because if you have to late plant them, say in August, all of a sudden the temperatures get warm and they don't actually kick off and settle in properly before they actually do start growing. So that can become a little bit of a problem. Because the other side of the end, and probably the other major thing out of the rain, has been there's been a great weed
Gee, I was
growth.
going to ask you about weeds, herbicides.
Some nasty weeds out there. There's some good old amaranthus and Californian thistles and the good old mallows. They're all there, harder to kill weeds. But look, there's some good herbicides, good range of herbicides. Key thing is, as I keep saying, identify what the spectrum of your weed is and then identify the material you should spray it with. And once again, probably earlier, but we need a bit more cold yet. It'd be nice to have a few more frosts and then get those herbicides out there, and the plants will suck that herbicide in. It'll be used within the plant, and there'll be some good death rate. And come springtime, there'll be nice clean ground floor down there for us to start growing things.
Jim, thank you very much indeed. We've got more for you on Rob's Country straight after the break. Welcome back to this week's program. Warwick Green is a chap who knows an awful lot about lucerne, so I wanted to find out, as far as he was concerned, what he should do if you've got a spare 5 acres or perhaps 10.
Well, this is a community project, I understand, Rob, and so a number of people are involved in it as part of a project to try and demonstrate the opportunity that is available on small to medium-sized lifestyle blocks or small to medium-sized farms. It's applicable everywhere. To introduce lucerne into part of the rotation, both from an economic point of view and also from a point of view of providing a sustainable crop for the farmer.
Let's look at the arithmetic, because it's about 2.3 hectares or about 5 acres.
Okay, so primarily the focus is to make hay for horses or for quality feed. We should be able to look at around 80 to 100 bales per hectare. These are the small standard bales that we used to, each cut. And realistically, 4 cuts a year is quite achievable, bearing in mind that your first cut's probably going to be in a fully established stand. Your first cut's going to be probably round about Christchurch Show Weekend, and then you're going to get one every sort of 35 to 40 days after that.
Now there's K-line available here. Does that vault up the?
Well, that'll increase your likely yield in terms of dry matter yield. So the lucerne's going to respond to that, which is going to be really good. And it just guarantees you really that you're going to get your 4 cuts. You don't want to probably go too much later than probably mid to late March and take that last cut off, and then let the lucerne crop re-establish before winter, because it basically closes down a bit. And we'll just have to watch that and monitor it, that we don't hammer it too hard in that first year.
Because it'd be pretty tempting to actually get another one.
Yeah, and people do, and then they wonder why the lucerne doesn't persist. Because like any plant, it has to build up root reserves. So it does that by having a breather and needs to have some top growth on in that late autumn so it can build up the root reserves before it goes through that dormant phase in winter. So then in the spring, soil temperatures increase, it's got the root reserves underway and away it goes, whoop, and it's into gear again. So you've got to be conscious of that.
Okay, now obviously the paddock has been sprayed off, so what are the steps?
Right, paddock's been sprayed with Roundup, which is great, so had a good kill of ryegrass and weeds. So the next step is we've got to do a soil test, so we've got to test for the pH and also the fertility, and address that if we have to by means of lime to improve the pH, and if we need to put phosphate on, then do that by means of a good fertiliser. We're going to direct drill the oats, so we're not going to cultivate, we're going to direct drill into the crop, which is good. Then basically don't need to do anything until we harvest the silage or the baleage off it. We'll just need to monitor it and make sure that we're very clear around the fertility that's going to be required, because I would suggest that when we come to planting, we'll be sowing the lucerne seed at around about 12 kilos to the hectare, and it will be inoculated seed, so it will have the rhizobia already on the seed. So we're all ready to go really. Once the plants are established, they'll have the inoculum and the rhizobia will be able to develop and start to fix nitrogen. So down the track, we don't need to apply any more nitrogen to the crop. So we're not going to have to put things like urea on because it's got its own system. What we'll need to do in the spring is make sure that we've got a good clean seed bed, Rob. So obviously we may need to spray it again when we take the oats off to control any weeds, and just make sure we've got a good stale seed bed, and then we should be able to direct drill into there and be up and away.
So around about show week for drilling?
That's what I'll be working on. I think that's, soil temperatures are good. I mean, the other beauty of direct drilling in this circumstance here is that we're going to be able to conserve soil moisture. So by not cultivating, if it turns out to be a dry spring, we've still got soil moisture protected in the subsurface, and so direct drilling in should be fine. And there should be plenty of moisture. So we'll just have to watch that when we.
Well, we'll definitely be following the crop to see what it's like.
Yeah.
So sowing about mid-November,
Yep.
And when will it be?
Well, I think we probably will want to look at probably taking a cut off that probably in early February. It's probably going to be we're not going to get as much in the first year. We might get 2 cuts, but that's all we're likely to get. Just take it easy in that first year. And the first cut's probably going to be a cut where we'll be, we'll have a little bit of shepherd's purse and 1 or 2 weeds, and we'll just tidy it up. But we'll obviously need to be conscious of maybe a herbicide in the early autumn if there are some resident weeds that we need to control.
Disease pressure?
Shouldn't be too much of a problem. This particular paddock here hasn't had a history of lucerne, so we haven't got any issues with things like soil-borne diseases that are associated with lucerne. That's one thing for viewers to note, is that you shouldn't really follow lucerne with lucerne. By that I mean, if you've got an old paddock of lucerne, don't go and basically replant it directly into lucerne, because you could have soil-borne diseases and problems. You need to go through a break crop for 3 to 4 years. So here we're fine. We've got no history, so we shouldn't have an issue, Rob. We'll just have to watch insects like aphids are probably our number one. And they're likely to come along in that sort of summer, early autumn period. So we may have to give it a spray for aphids, especially when the crop's establishing.
And very briefly, how long do you expect the stand to last?
Well, a good lucerne stand should be sort of 7 to 8 years, and you should be able to get good productivity out of it for that period of time. The Force 4, which we're going to plant here, is proven as an exceptionally good variety to persist and to produce really good dry matter production over many years. So yeah, let's hope that's going to work here.
And I'm sure. Well, the oats are in. The oats went in today, and the returns from the oats, they reckon, will pay for everything, plus a lovely, specially big margin after that. From then on, just making money out of lucerne. Can't be bad, can it, on 5 acres? After the break, it's Federated Farmers. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Nick, most people, when you talk to them about grain and seed harvest, they say something unprintable. How bad has it been?
Yeah, look, it has been one to forget for most of our grower members, I think. I don't think anybody sort of around the South Island would have said that they've had an easy time of it this year with the pretty persistent rain that we had through March and April, with just an inability to get on the crops even once they come ready. I think that growers with a higher proportion of earlier grasses and cereals might have been able to get the bulk of their stuff done before that rain really set in, but anybody who had a high proportion of late cereals or the sort of higher value small seed vegetable crops would have been were really struggling, I think. One thing I'm reasonably happy to report at least is that some of the people I've talked to in the last couple of days have said that the majority of people should have been able to get quite a bit cleaned up in the earlier part of this weed as they had a bit of wind to dry things out. So that at least is encouraging, but
Yeah,
frustrating all in all, I think.
Because the real scary thing is sprouting and all that sort of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, and I think that as some of those small seeds go through the seed dressers and some of the tests come back, there may well be some quality issues, but and that's something that growers are going to have to be aware of. But the good thing is that they're off the paddock, and that's the start. From a cereal point of view, I suppose that is an issue, but I think the one thing to keep in mind, and it won't be new to any cropping farmer, is that if these were harvested at reasonably high moistures, and they've got to get in and get dried straight away, not sort of put away with a thought to drying before delivery, because that's when the quality can really deteriorate.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you found, Nick, that people are saying, well, hey, listen, I've got some spare space in my dryer, do you want to come and chuck it in there?
Yeah, we have, both in the case of spare space in the dryer and spare combine capacity. We went through a process a couple of weeks ago where our Mid-Canterbury President, Chris Allen, issued through the media a call for cropping farmers to think about their neighbours and to help each other. Those people that had spare capacity, whether it be dryers or combines, to get their harvesters in the paddock with their neighbour and help them out. And we had a great response to that. It's been great. Probably would have happened without Federated Farmers, but I think it reflects really well on the cropping farm.
They do, don't they, farmers? They pull together. They look over the fence and say, listen, I've just finished mine. Oh, fill it up and take it next door.
Oh, look, they absolutely do. It's unlike a lot of other businesses, guys which in some instances are competing against each other are, more than happy to offer their support. They're all going through the same, I suppose, trials that the weather presents to farmers, and farming is sometimes just about dealing with the weather, although I will say that pretty much everybody I've spoken to has said that this really was one out of the box, not just the amount of rain, but the number of rain days through March and April made it really difficult.
And all those terrible cloudy days where you got just enough rain to...
Yeah.
And praying for nor'westers. When do people prayed for nor'westers before?
I know, it never quite came.
As far as contracts are concerned, your organisation, no doubt, is at the end of a telephone if you aren't able to fulfil a contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose with some of those quality issues that may pop up, and also as I understand, some crops just might have got to the point where they had to be abandoned and they weren't taken at all. Growers are going to be considering what their obligations are with their contracts, and we've got a number of ways we can help you, either through just a bit of advice through our farming network, through our elected representatives, but also our legal advice service for members, where you get 15 minutes of legal advice without paying, and that may be enough actually just to answer a few quick questions about what your contract terms are.
Because that must be a major concern for a lot of people because they've signed it.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on what your crop is and whether you're looking at an area contract or a tonnage, but certainly, look, our advice would be to know what your obligations are, but also to keep in pretty close contact with your reps from various different contracting companies. I think that happens anyway nowadays. The reps are always keen to know what's happening with the crops that they've contracted, but yeah, the important thing is just to know, is to let the contracted buyer know, what the situation is, and often it can be worked through.
And the other thing that you as an organisation really stress is talk to your advisors, your bank, your lawyers, your accountants, talk to them.
Absolutely, you can't be too informed. That's always our theory, and we can offer advice on how to do that and who to talk to.
Brilliant, Nick, thank you very much. It's always great talking to you guys, it really is. Their phone number is on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you have just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.